Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. Estate liquidation is not a glamorous profession, and I've never tried to make it one. You go into the houses of people who are gone, and you determine what they left behind and what it's worth and where it should go next. That's the whole job. The death is always already done by the time I arrive, which means I'm not dealing with grief or urgency or any of the things that make death hard for most people. I'm dealing with objects. Objects have provenance, function, and destination, and my job is to identify all three and move everything toward its appropriate outcome. I'm good at it because I don't sentimentalize and I don't get distracted and I don't assign meaning to things that are just things. 18 years of doing this work has produced in me a very clean relationship with the material residue of other people's lives. I catalog what's there. I don't editorialize. I want to be clear about that before I describe what I found in the Sutter house, because what I'm going to describe is going to read like the account of someone who editorializes, and I need you to understand that the editorializing happened because the material required it, not because I brought it to the material. The Sutter property came to me through a county referral, the kind of job that arrives when an estate has no heirs, no executor, and no one with any personal interest in the outcome. The county needed the property cleared and catalogued before it could be assessed and transferred, and they needed someone who could work through a house that had been sealed for 18 years without supervision or interference. 18 years empty was on the longer end of what I typically encountered. The previous owner, a man named Elias Sutter, had died at 71 of causes the death certificate described in the standard neutral language of unattended deaths. He'd lived alone on the property for the entirety of his adult life. No family documented, no social connections the county had been able to trace. The property had been sealed after his body was found, found being a relative term when the finding took place several weeks after the fact, and had remained sealed through the administrative process of establishing that no one had any claim on it. I drove out on a Monday morning in March and let myself in with the county key. The house was a 2-story frame construction, older than the century, with the specific smell of sealed spaces that had been full of a person's life for a long time. Not decay. The county had handled the necessary remediation before releasing the property to the clearance process. Just the dense, layered smell of accumulated time, of a life that had compressed itself into the available space over decades and left an impression in the air. I worked the ground floor first, which was standard procedure. Catalogue in place, condition noted, disposition recommended, keep for auction, donate, discard. Sutter had lived frugally, and his possessions reflected it. Functional furniture, basic kitchen equipment, a modest library of the kind assembled by someone who read seriously and bought used. Nothing of significant monetary value, nothing that required specialist assessment, nothing unusual. I found the basement door in the kitchen, which was where basement doors usually were, and I went down on the second day after I'd completed the ground floor inventory. The basement was divided into 2 sections. A utility area with the mechanical systems and storage shelving, and a finished room at the far end with a desk, a chair, and floor-to-ceiling wooden shelving filled with identical notebooks, dozens of them, the same model, the same dark green cover, arranged in sequence by the date ranges written on the spines in a hand that was precise and uniform across what appeared to be decades of entries. The door was in the foundation wall at the far end of the finished room, set into the stone, framed in old wood, with a simple iron latch. It was not on my floor plan of the basement, which I had drafted from the exterior dimensions of the house. The foundation wall it was set into was the exterior wall of the structure. There was nothing behind it that belonged to the house. I catalogued it as an anomalous interior door, possible exterior access, and lifted the latch and pulled it open. It opened onto a forest interior. Not a basement egress, not a crawl space, not any of the things an interior door in a foundation wall could reasonably open onto. A forest, live trees, leaf litter on the ground, the specific quality of filtered light that belonged to a canopy in early afternoon. The air that came through was cool and smelled of actual forest, wet bark and earth, completely real in the way that distinguishes a thing from a representation of a thing. I stood at the open door for a moment. Then I closed it, noted the time in my work log, 10:43, and wrote, "Door opens onto exterior wooded location, not consistent with property geography. Assess further." I went back to the utility section and checked the exterior foundation from the inside and confirmed that the door was in a wall with solid earth on the other side of it, or should have been. I went outside and walked the exterior of the foundation and found no evidence of a door, no frame, no seam, no indication that there was anything in the stone but stone. I went back to the finished room and opened the door again at 11:20. The forest was gone. It opened onto the interior of a building I didn't recognize, a corridor, institutional in character, fluorescent lit, with linoleum flooring in a color pattern that belonged to a specific era of institutional design. Empty, no people visible. A clock on the wall at the far end read a time I didn't note because I was looking at the clock to identify it as a feature rather than to read it. The corridor smelled of the specific combination of cleaning solution and recycled air that hospitals and schools and government offices all shared. I closed the door. I noted the time and the description in my work log. Then I sat down in Sutter's chair and looked at the shelving full of identical notebooks, and I understood that I was going to need to read them before I continued. The notebooks were dated on their spines in monthly ranges. The earliest was from approximately 20 years before Sutter's death. The most recent ended 2 weeks before the date the county had determined he died, which meant he'd been making entries until very close to the end. I opened the most recent notebook first because that's how I worked. Current state before history, present condition before provenance. The format was consistent and immediately clear. Each entry had a date, a time, a number, and a description. The number, I understood, within 3 entries, was a count. Each opening of the door was numbered sequentially across all the notebooks, running from entry 1 in the earliest notebook to whatever the final count was in the one I was holding. The descriptions were of what the door had opened onto: precise, neutral, observational. the language of someone who catalogued things for a living, or who had learned to catalogue this specific thing with the discipline of someone who understood that the record was the point. I sat in Sutter's chair and read for 3 hours. The places the door opened onto were ordinary. That was the first thing the notebooks established. Ordinary places, specific places, places that had the quality of real locations observed at a real moment in time. A kitchen in a house, the interior of a car seen from outside through the driver's window, a bedroom, a bathroom, a workshop with tools on pegboards and sawdust on the floor, the exterior of a building at night, seen from what seemed to be a few feet outside the door, an office with papers on a desk and a computer with a dark screen. The places were ordinary, and they were empty, and they had, Sutter noted across many entries, a specific quality of quiet that was different from the quiet of an empty place. He had struggled to describe this quality in the early notebooks, and by the middle period had settled on a phrase he used consistently, the quiet of something recent. He'd written it the first time without apparent confidence and then kept using it because it was accurate. Halfway through the middle period notebooks, I found the first date correlation. Sutter had begun, at some point in the 3rd or 4th year of his documentation, adding a second notation to each entry, a date placed below the location description that was weeks or sometimes months after the entry date. Initially, these appeared without explanation. Several entries later, he added, once, a source notation, a newspaper name, and what appeared to be a page reference. The entry read, bedroom, single occupant space, personal items on nightstand, that quiet. Below it, the date. Below the date, the paper name and reference. I looked at the date. I looked at the entry date. The gap was 19 days. I understood what I was looking at. I set the notebook down and sat in the chair for a long time. I went back to the earliest notebooks and read from the beginning. The early entries had no date correlations. Sutter had been documenting the door's openings for approximately 2 years before the correlations began appearing, which meant it had taken him 2 years to understand what the places had in common. I tried to reconstruct how he'd arrived at it from the entries themselves. What had changed in his observation of the places that led him to the pattern? And the best I could determine was that it had been the quality of quiet that he'd eventually named. He had seen it enough times that he'd started trying to identify what produced it, and what produced it was the specific atmospheric condition of a space where a person had recently and alone died. The door opened onto the places where people died alone, not at the moment of death. The spaces Sutter described were empty, the person already gone. In the window between the death and the discovery, the duration of that window varied from entries correlated to deaths found within days to entries correlated to deaths not found for weeks or months, and the doors opening onto those places corresponded to the period of the undiscovered interval. Sutter had been documenting it for 18 years. He had correlated several hundred entries to deaths that he had subsequently identified through newspaper reports, county records, and what appeared to be, in the later notebooks, some degree of systematic search for the corresponding event. He had never, in 18 years of entries, noted that he had contacted anyone, had never noted that he had tried to intervene, or that intervention had occurred to him as a possibility, or that he had done anything with the information except record it and correlate it and number it in sequence. Entry 1 through entry, several hundred. 18 years. Alone in the house with the door. I did not know what to do with Sutter yet. I still don't, entirely. The question of what he was, a witness, something harder to name, a man who had found a window onto the specific loneliness of unattended death and had sat with it for 18 years without looking away and without calling anyone, was a question the notebooks answered in terms of what he did and did not answer in terms of why. There was no explanation in the notebooks, no justification, no self-examination, no passage where he addressed the question of whether he should be doing something else with what he knew. Just the entries, just the catalogue. I understood that. The impulse I understood completely. I opened the door 6 more times over the following 2 days. I was being methodical, which was the only way I knew how to be, and the methodology had extended itself to include the door the same way it included everything else in the house. Each opening produced a different place, a laundry room with a basket of unfinished laundry on the folding table, the interior of a storage unit, boxes stacked, a folding chair open in the center for reasons that were clear and not clear, a hallway in a house with a runner rug and framed photographs on the wall that I didn't look at closely because I didn't want to look at them closely. An outdoor space I thought was a backyard. At dusk, a lawn chair facing away from the door. Each place had that quiet. Sutter's phrase. I understood it now from the inside, from having stood at the open door and felt it come through. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of a specific kind of aftermath. The atmospheric residue of something that had happened in the space and that the space was still holding. I made my entries in my work log. Date, time, description. Not numbered. I was not going to number them. But I made the entries because not making them felt like a failure of the only discipline I had available. On the second afternoon, I opened the door and recognized what I saw. It was a room I knew. Not a room I had been in. A room I recognized from a photograph, from the context of a recent professional engagement. I had cleared a house 3 months earlier in a county 2 hours north. The house had belonged to a woman named Carvey, referred to me by the same county system that had referred the Sutter property. Single occupant, no heirs, unattended death, standard referral. I had cleared the house over 4 days in December, and I had catalogued the contents of the bedroom I was looking at through the open door. The specific dresser, the specific lamp on the nightstand, the specific curtains with their particular pattern. The room was empty. She'd already been gone when I was there in December. The county had handled what needed handling before I arrived, same as always. But the door was showing it to me now, in March, months after I had catalogued and cleared it. I stood at the open door for a long time. Then I understood something about the door that the notebooks had not fully told me, which was that the window of undiscovered interval was not always a matter of days or weeks, that the door opened onto these places in the gap between death and witness, and that witness could take forms beyond the finding of a body, that the door might consider the clearing of a house, the cataloguing of someone's life, the careful systematic accounting of what they left behind, to be a form of witnessing that kept the window open long after anyone would have expected it to close. I had been in that house. I had witnessed it in the way I witnessed everything, which was professionally and thoroughly, and without sentiment, and the door was showing it to me as though the witnessing hadn't closed anything, as though my kind of witness didn't count. I closed the door. I finished the estate clearance over the following 3 days. I catalogued the ground floor contents for disposition. I catalogued the utility section of the basement, and I catalogued the finished room, including the notebooks, which I listed as personal journals, approximately 40 volumes, historical documentation, recommend archival assessment. I did not catalogue the door. I described it in my final report as an anomalous basement feature, non-functional, recommend assessment by structural specialist prior to property transfer. I did not describe what it opened onto. I did not attach the pages from my work log where I had made my own entries. I took those pages home. I've been trying to decide what to do with Sutter's notebooks for the 3 months since I filed the clearance report. The county has the property in transfer proceedings, and no one has asked me about the structural anomaly I flagged, which means either no one has looked at it yet, or someone has looked at it and made the same decision I made, which was to write anomalous in a document and move on. The notebooks are the harder question. Sutter's 18 years of correlations between what the door showed him and the death that preceded what it showed him. There is, in those notebooks, a record of people who died alone and undiscovered, and the dates and locations are specific enough that the record could be made useful, could be given to someone, could become the basis of something that used the information rather than just holding it. I think about why Sutter didn't do that. I think about it the way I think about estate questions that don't have clean answers, turning the available evidence over and looking for what it tells me. The notebooks don't tell me. He catalogued and correlated for 18 years, and he did not use the information, and he died alone in that house with the door in the basement, and nobody found him for several weeks. And I do not know if the door showed his room to itself, or if that was not how the mechanism worked, and I do not know how to find out. I think about the room I recognized, the Carvey house, the window I had apparently not closed, with my kind of witnessing. I think about the notebook entry I did not write, the one that would have followed the pattern Sutter established, the date, the time, the number in sequence, the description of what I saw. The number would have been, continuing from where Sutter left off, entry 412. I have not written it. I'm not sure not writing it changes anything. I'm not sure writing it would either. The door opens onto what it opens onto, and the record of the opening is a different thing from the opening itself, and what Sutter understood about that distinction across 18 years of sitting with it is not something I can reconstruct from the catalogue he left behind. I cleared his house. I catalogued what he left. I determined provenance, function, and destination for the material contents of a life lived alone, with a door in the basement that opened onto other lives lived alone. I have not determined what to do with the notebooks. I have not determined what to do with my own pages. I keep coming back to the same place, which is that Sutter had 18 years and the same question, and he kept the catalogue, and he kept the silence, and he died with both intact. And either that was a failure, or it was a decision he'd worked his way to over a long time, and I cannot tell from the outside Which one it was, I'm going to have to decide for myself. I'm working on it.